My name is Juniper. I'm 29, and the moment my sister Magnolia called me a failure at our family dinner destroyed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love. What started as a typical monthly family gathering at Mom's house turned into the most humiliating night of my life when my older sister decided to tear apart every aspect of my existence in front of our entire extended family. As I sat there listening to her cruel laughter echo around the dining room while relatives nodded in agreement, I had no idea that her vicious words would trigger a chain reaction that would expose just how much my family had been taking advantage of my generosity for years. The blood loyalty I'd sacrificed everything to maintain was about to prove itself completely one-sided, and the financial reckoning that followed would teach them all exactly what failure really looks like. Hey everyone, before we dive into this story about family betrayal and the most satisfying financial revenge you'll ever hear, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? If you've ever been called a failure by someone you've been supporting, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this tale of sisterly cruelty and ultimate justice is going to leave you speechless. Growing up as Magnolia's younger sister meant living in the shadow of perfection every single day. While I struggled through state school, working multiple jobs to pay my own way, my older sister glided through life with everything handed to her on a silver platter. Magnolia was the golden child, beautiful, charismatic, successful in every traditional sense that mattered to our parents. At 32, she worked as a marketing director at a prestigious firm, lived in a stunning downtown loft, drove a luxury BMW, and seemed to have the perfect life that everyone in our family constantly praised. What they didn't know, what I'd been hiding for 7 years, was that I was the one actually paying for most of it. It started innocently enough when Magnolia graduated college with massive student loan debt. She'd lived it up during university, taking expensive spring break trips, buying designer clothes, eating at fancy restaurants, while I'd worked in the campus library and lived on ramen noodles. When the bills came due, she panicked. Our parents, who'd already stretched themselves thin helping with her tuition, couldn't cover the loan payments. That's when she came to me with tears in her eyes, begging for help. Just until I get established in my career, she promised. 6 months, maybe a year at most. I'll pay you back every penny with interest. I was 22, fresh out of college myself, working an entry-level accounting job and living in a tiny studio apartment. But I loved my sister, and I believed in her potential. So I took on her $847 monthly student loan payment, convincing myself it was temporary. 7 years later, I was still making that payment. But it didn't stop there. Over the years, the requests kept coming, each one presented as a temporary emergency that only I could solve. Her car payment, when she had to have the BMW to look professional, $623 per month. Her health insurance, when she was between jobs, $312 per month. Her rent assistance, when she wanted to upgrade to the expensive loft, $1,200 per month. Every time she'd promise it was temporary. Every time she'd swear she'd pay me back. Every time I believed her because she was family, and family helped each other. Meanwhile, I was living like a pauper. While Magnolia posted Instagram photos of her glamorous life, I was working 60-hour weeks at my accounting firm, taking freelance bookkeeping jobs on weekends, and living in the same cramped studio apartment I'd rented 7 years earlier. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that broke down regularly, wore clothes from discount stores, and hadn't taken a real vacation since college. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the complete lack of recognition or gratitude. At family gatherings, everyone would praise Magnolia's success, her beautiful apartment, her professional achievements. When relatives asked how she afforded such a nice lifestyle on her salary, she'd just smile mysteriously and say something about being good with money and making smart financial decisions. Meanwhile, when anyone asked about my life, the conversation would quickly shift back to Magnolia's latest accomplishment. My parents would mention my modest lifestyle with a tone that suggested I simply lacked ambition. Extended family members would wonder aloud why I hadn't applied myself like my sister had. What they didn't know was that I was supporting not just myself, but essentially funding Magnolia's entire image of success. Every designer purse, every expensive dinner, every glamorous photo was built on the foundation of my sacrifice and hard work. I'd tried to bring up the debt with Magnolia multiple times over the years. She'd always deflect with promises about next month or explanations about unexpected expenses. When I suggested we should at least tell our parents about the arrangement, she'd get defensive and accuse me of trying to embarrass her or make her look bad. "You know how important appearances are in my industry," she'd say. "If people think I'm struggling financially, it could hurt my career. You're helping both of us by helping me succeed." Somehow, she'd convinced me that my financial support was actually an investment in both our futures, that her success would eventually benefit our entire family, that I was being smart by believing in her potential. But as the years passed and the payments continued, I started to realize that Magnolia had no intention of ever becoming truly independent. She'd gotten comfortable with our arrangement. Why would she give up a lifestyle funded by someone else's hard work? The breaking point had been building for months. I'd been hinting that I needed to reduce my financial support, mentioning my own goals of buying a house, maybe starting a family someday. Magnolia would listen with a blank expression, then change the subject to her latest work drama or romantic situation. When I'd finally worked up the courage to suggest we create a formal repayment plan, she'd laughed and said, "Oh, Junie, you're so uptight about money. Family doesn't keep score like that. Besides, you're doing fine." That comment stung more than she knew. I wasn't doing fine. I was exhausted, financially drained, and watching my own dreams slip away while I funded hers. But I'd kept quiet, kept paying, kept sacrificing because I believed that's what family meant. I had no idea that all my years of loyalty and support were about to be thrown back in my face in the most humiliating way possible. The monthly family dinner at Mom's house was usually a predictable affair. Mom would cook too much food, Dad would dominate conversations about politics, and Magnolia would regale everyone with stories about her glamorous life, while I sat quietly picking at my food and counting the minutes until I could leave. But this particular Sunday in October felt different from the moment I walked in. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that made me uncomfortable. Extended family was there. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike, our cousins Jessica and Brandon, even Grandma Helen, who rarely attended these gatherings anymore. "There's our little Juniper," Aunt Sarah called out as I entered using the diminutive that had followed me since childhood. "Still living in that tiny apartment downtown." Before I could answer, Magnolia swept into the room, looking absolutely stunning in a new designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Sorry I'm late, everyone. I had to stop by the office. You know how it is when you're climbing the corporate ladder." The conversation immediately shifted to Magnolia's recent promotion to senior marketing director, her new corner office, her increased responsibilities. I listened from the kitchen as I helped Mom with the final dinner preparations, feeling the familiar pang of invisibility that came with these family gatherings. "She's always been the ambitious one," I heard Grandma Helen say approvingly. "Some people are born with that drive, that hunger for success. And some people are just content to drift through life without any real goals," Aunt Sarah added with a meaningful glance toward the kitchen. I gripped the serving dish tighter, my knuckles white with the effort of staying calm. They had no idea what my real goals were, what I'd sacrificed to help Magnolia achieve hers. Dinner started normally enough. Dad carved the roast while Mom fussed over everyone's plates. Magnolia held court at one end of the table, describing her latest business trip to San Francisco, the five-star hotel, the client dinners at exclusive restaurants. The company spares no expense, she said, with a casual wave of her manicured hand. When you're bringing in the kind of revenue I generate, they treat you accordingly. That's what success looks like, Uncle Mike said admiringly. You've really made something of yourself, Magnolia. I pushed food around my plate, trying to swallow past the growing knot in my throat. Every word of praise for her financial success felt like a knife twist, knowing exactly where that success really came from. Then Jessica, my cousin who'd recently graduated college, asked the question that changed everything. So, Juniper, what are your career goals? Are you planning to advance at your firm? Maybe get your CPA certification. It was an innocent question, but somehow it triggered something in Magnolia. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the constant attention she'd been receiving, but her expression suddenly shifted to something cold and calculating. Oh, Junie's not really the ambitious type, Magnolia said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She's more of a steady, reliable worker bee. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real success. The table went quiet. I felt my face burning as everyone's attention focused on me. That's not fair, I said quietly. I work very hard at my job. I've received excellent performance reviews, and working hard and achieving success are two different things. Magnolia interrupted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. I mean, look at your life, Junie. You're 29 years old, still living in that depressing little studio apartment, driving that ancient car that breaks down every other week. When was the last time you went on a real vacation? When was the last time you bought something nice for yourself? I stared at her, speechless. She knew exactly why I couldn't afford those things. She knew where every spare penny of my income went. Success isn't just about working hard, she continued, warming to her theme as she noticed she had everyone's rapt attention. It's about making smart choices, setting goals, having the drive to actually achieve something meaningful. Some people just drift through life without any real ambition or vision. Magnolia, Mom said uncertainly, sensing the tension building. But my sister was just getting started. The wine had loosened her tongue, and years of suppressed superiority came pouring out. I don't mean to be harsh, she said, though her smile suggested she was enjoying every word, but somebody needs to tell Juniper the truth. She's stuck in mediocrity and she doesn't even seem to care. No career advancement, no romantic relationships that go anywhere, no real goals beyond just existing. The silence around the table was deafening. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, some sympathetic, others thoughtful, as if they were actually considering whether Magnolia's brutal assessment might be accurate. That's when she delivered the final blow. I love my sister, but let's be honest, she's a failure. And the worst part is, she's comfortable being a failure. She's given up on herself. The word failure hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt something break inside me, some last thread of loyalty and love that had kept me tied to this family dynamic for so many years. Excuse me, I managed to whisper, standing up from the table on shaking legs. Oh, don't be so sensitive, Magnolia called after me as I headed for the bathroom. I'm just trying to motivate you, but as I locked the bathroom door behind me and stared at my reflection in the mirror, I realized that my sister had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because while she'd been busy humiliating me in front of our entire family, she'd forgotten one crucial fact. I was the one who'd been bankrolling her successful lifestyle for 7 years. And if I was such a failure, then maybe it was time for me to stop supporting her success. Sitting in that bathroom, listening to the muffled conversation continuing in the dining room as if nothing had happened, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and humiliation were still there, burning in my chest like acid, but underneath those feelings, something else was growing, a cold, calculating anger that I'd never experienced before. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through 7 years of payments that had quietly left my account every month like clockwork. Student loan payment $847, car payment $623, health insurance $312, rent assistance $1.200. Smaller amounts for her gym membership, her phone bill, even her Netflix subscription because she'd claimed she was temporarily strapped for cash. The total was staggering $3,982 per month, nearly $48,000 per year. Over 7 years, I'd transferred approximately $336,000 to support my sister's lifestyle. Money that could have bought me a house, funded my own graduate degree, allowed me to take real vacations, build real savings, maybe even start my own business. Instead, every dollar had gone to maintain the illusion of Magnolia's independence and success, while she told our family I was a failure. I opened my notes app and started making a list, my fingers flying across the screen as years of suppressed resentment finally found an outlet. Every monthly payment, every emergency transfer, every time she'd convinced me to cover something just this once that had somehow become permanent. But it wasn't just the money. As I sat there, memories started flooding back. All the times I'd made excuses for her behavior, covered for her mistakes, or stayed silent when she took credit for things I'd helped make possible. Like the time she'd needed help with a major client presentation, and I'd spent my entire weekend researching and creating graphics for her, only to watch her receive praise for the innovative approach and attention to detail that had secured a major contract. Or when she'd been short on rent money and I'd not only covered it but also helped her clean and stage her apartment for a promotion she was applying for, listening to her practice her interview responses for hours. When she got the job, she'd celebrated with an expensive dinner that she'd charged to my credit card because she was still transitioning between paychecks. The psychological manipulation had been so gradual, so expertly done, that I'd never recognized it for what it was. Every request for help came with just enough vulnerability and gratitude to make me feel needed and important. Every promise to pay me back came with detailed explanations about her financial planning that made it seem responsible and realistic. But tonight, calling me a failure in front of our entire family while wearing a dress I'd essentially paid for, she'd finally shown her true colors. The grateful, struggling sister had been a performance. The real Magnolia was someone who saw my generosity as weakness, my love as stupidity, my sacrifice as something she was entitled to. I took a deep breath and opened a new note on my phone, this one titled Operation Independence. If Magnolia thought I was a failure, then she was about to learn what life looked like without a failure's financial support. The plan that formed in my mind was beautiful in its simplicity. I wouldn't confront her directly or make dramatic announcements. I would simply stop. Every automatic payment, every monthly transfer, every small favor that had somehow become a permanent obligation, all of it would end. But I wouldn't just cancel the payments and disappear. No, this required a more surgical approach. I would let her discover each cancellation organically in the most embarrassing and inconvenient ways possible. First, I would cancel her student loan payment, which was due in 3 days. When the default notices started arriving, she'd have to explain to her management why her credit was being damaged. In her industry, financial instability could be a career killer. Next, her car payment. Nothing, said successful marketing executive, like having your BMW repossessed from the company parking lot. I wondered how she'd explain that to her colleagues and clients. Then, her health insurance. A medical emergency without coverage would certainly test her smart financial decisions. The rent assistance would be last, giving her just enough time to scramble and panic before realizing the full scope of what was happening. But the masterstroke would be the smaller payments. The gym membership, phone bill subscriptions, and other little luxuries that she'd forgotten I was covering. Death by 1,000 cuts as her perfectly curated lifestyle fell apart piece by piece. I pulled up my bank's website and started the process immediately. Each cancellation felt like removing a chain that had been weighing me down for years. With every automatic payment I deleted, I felt lighter, freer, more like myself than I had in years. As I worked, I could hear Magnolia's voice carrying from the dining room, still holding court, probably telling another story about her professional success. Let her enjoy it while it lasted. My phone buzzed with a text from, "Mom, honey, are you okay, Magnolia? Didn't mean anything by what she said. You know how she gets when she's had wine." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Mom's automatic defense of Magnolia, her dismissal of my humiliation as just how she gets, was part of the problem. They'd all enabled this dynamic for years, praising Magnolia's success, while ignoring the financial foundation that made it possible. Well, they were about to learn exactly how much my failure had been supporting their golden child's achievements. I stood up, straightened my clothes, and unlocked the bathroom door. Time to rejoin the family dinner and watch Magnolia bask in her final moments of unearned glory. Because starting tomorrow, she was going to learn what actual failure felt like. But before I continue with the most satisfying financial revenge you'll ever hear, I need to pause here because what comes next is going to shock you. If you're feeling that mix of anger and anticipation that comes from watching justice build momentum, hit that notification bell because the systematic destruction of my sister's fake success is about to begin, and you won't want to miss a single detail of her downfall. I returned to the dinner table with a calm smile, deflecting Mom's concerned looks and Aunt Sarah's awkward attempts at small talk. Magnolia was deep in conversation with Brandon about her upcoming business trip to New York, describing the exclusive hotel where her company was putting her up, the Broadway show she planned to see, the shopping she intended to do on Fifth Avenue. "The company card covers most expenses," she said with a casual wave, "but I've been saving up for some personal purchases. You know how important it is to dress for the position you want, not the position you have." I nodded along, pleasantly eating my dessert while mentally calculating that her savings were actually the money I'd been transferring to her account every month. Every dollar she planned to spend on that shopping spree was money I'd earned working overtime at my accounting firm. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of fake smiles and polite conversation. When it came time to leave, Magnolia gave me her usual perfunctory hug and said, "Don't take what I said too seriously, Junie. I just worry about you sometimes." "I know," I replied, returning her embrace with what probably looked like forgiveness. "You're just looking out for me." If only she knew how much I'd been looking out for her. The first cancellation hit exactly 3 days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from Magnolia. "Hey, weird question. Did you maybe forget to make a payment this month? I got a notice about my student loan being overdue." I waited 2 hours before responding. "Oh no, I've been so swamped at work. Let me check my account tonight and get it sorted." Another text came an hour later. "It's okay if you need to skip this month. I know money's been tight for you." The condescension in that message was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that I, the failure, might be struggling to support her lifestyle. The fact that she wasn't even slightly concerned about taking on her own loan payment after 7 years told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed our arrangement. I didn't respond to that text. By the end of the week, her tone had shifted. "Junie, I really need you to handle that payment. The late fees are adding up, and it's affecting my credit score. This is important." I called her back that evening, injecting just the right amount of stress into my voice. "I'm so sorry, Magnolia. My own finances are a mess right now. My car needed major repairs, and I had some unexpected medical bills. I might need to take a break from helping out for a while." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "What do you mean a break?" she finally asked. "Just temporarily," I said, echoing the same phrase she'd used 7 years earlier. "Just until I get my own situation sorted out. You understand, right? But I'm counting on that payment, Junie. I can't just take over a $847 monthly expense without notice." "I thought you were doing really well financially," I said innocently. "You're always talking about your promotions and bonuses. Surely you can handle your own student loan payment now." Another long pause. "It's not that simple. I have a budget, and this payment isn't in it. My whole financial structure is built around our current arrangement." There it was. The admission that her entire lifestyle was dependent on my support. But instead of gratitude or recognition, I heard only panic about how my financial crisis might inconvenience her. "I'm really sorry," I repeated. "Maybe you could ask Mom and Dad for help, or take out a personal loan to cover it temporarily. Are you serious right now?" Her voice was getting sharper. "You can't just abandon me without warning. We have an agreement." "An agreement?" I said, genuinely curious. "I don't remember signing anything. I thought I was just helping family temporarily." The conversation ended with her hanging up on me. The car payment was due the following week. This time, I didn't even pretend to forget. I simply didn't make the payment. When she called 3 days later, frantic because BMW Financial Services had contacted her about the overdue payment, I was ready. "Oh, didn't I mention I've had to cut back on all my discretionary spending? I'm really focusing on my own financial goals now." "Discretionary spending," her voice was incredulous. "This is my car payment. Write your car payment," I agreed pleasantly. "For your car. But you've been paying it for 3 years. I've been helping you pay it," I corrected. "But you called me a failure at dinner last week, and it got me thinking, maybe you're right. Maybe I have been failing at taking care of my own financial future." The line went quiet for a long moment. "That dinner. Junie, you know I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to motivate you." "And it worked," I said brightly. "I'm incredibly motivated now. Motivated to focus on my own success instead of supporting someone else's." "You can't just cut me off," she said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "I can't afford all these payments on my own. My whole budget assumes what I prompted. Assumes you'll keep helping," she admitted quietly. "For how long?" I asked. "Forever." "Were you planning to pay me back ever, or was this always meant to be permanent?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because we both knew the truth. She'd never intended to become financially independent. She'd been content to let me fund her lifestyle indefinitely while she built her career and social status on the foundation of my sacrifice. "Look," she said, "finally, maybe we can work out a payment plan. I could start taking over some of these expenses gradually." "That's a great idea," I agreed. "Start with all of them. Today." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Not permanently. I wanted to see how this played out, but long enough to let the panic really set in. Because we were just getting started. The beauty of my plan was that I didn't have to do anything dramatic or confrontational. I simply had to stop being the invisible foundation holding up Magnolia's life, and gravity would do the rest. Within 2 weeks, the cracks were starting to show. Her health insurance was canceled for non-payment, which she discovered when she tried to fill a prescription for her allergy medication. Her gym membership was suspended, which was particularly embarrassing since she'd been posting Instagram stories from there just that morning. Her phone service was threatened with disconnection, but the BMW repossession was the masterpiece. I heard about it from our cousin Jessica, who worked downtown near Magnolia's office building. She called me, barely able to contain her shock. "Juniper, the weirdest thing just happened." I was walking past Magnolia's building for lunch, and I saw a tow truck taking her BMW. I thought maybe she'd parked illegally, but the driver said it was a repossession. What's going on? I made appropriate surprised noises while internally celebrating. Oh my God, really? Maybe it's some kind of mistake, that's what I thought, but I saw Magnolia come running out of the building looking absolutely frantic. She was crying and arguing with the tow truck driver. It was really uncomfortable to watch. I felt a tiny pang of sympathy, just a tiny one, imagining my sister's humiliation as her colleagues watched her car being repossessed from the company parking lot. But then I remembered her calling me a failure in front of our entire family, and the sympathy evaporated. I should probably call her, I said to Jessica. She's probably really upset. Yeah, she looked devastated. I wanted to go help, but I didn't want to embarrass her more. After hanging up with Jessica, I unblocked Magnolia's number long enough to see the backlog of increasingly desperate messages she'd been sending. Junie, please call me back. This is an emergency. They took my car. They actually repossessed my car from work. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I know you're angry about dinner, but this is destroying my life. Please, we need to talk. I'm sorry, okay, I'm sorry about what I said. I didn't mean it. You're not a failure. Please just call me back. The final message was voicemail, and I could hear her crying, Junie, I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart. My credit is ruined, I can't get to work, and everyone at the office is asking questions. I need help. I need my sister. Please. I almost called her back then. Almost. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to myself as a reminder of why I was doing this. Because for 7 years, I'd been the one struggling, working extra jobs, sacrificing my own dreams, and she'd never once called to check if I needed help. She'd never asked if I was okay, never wondered how I was managing to support both of us on my modest salary. The only reason she cared now was because her comfortable lifestyle was threatened. The rent assistance cancellation was scheduled for the first of the month. I'd timed it perfectly. She'd already committed to the expensive loft lease based on my monthly $1.200 contribution, and her actual salary couldn't cover the full amount. 2 days before rent was due, she showed up at my apartment. I watched through my peephole as she stood in the hallway, looking nothing like the polished marketing executive who'd humiliated me at dinner 3 weeks earlier. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she was carrying a manila envelope that probably contained legal notices about her various unpaid bills. I know you're in there, Junie, she called through the door. We need to talk. I opened the door slowly, making sure to look surprised. Magnolia, what are you doing here? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, Can I come in, please? My tiny studio apartment had never felt more perfect than it did at that moment. After years of being embarrassed by my modest living situation, I finally understood that it represented something important: independence. Unlike my sister's impressive loft, I could actually afford my rent without anyone else's help. Sure, I said, stepping aside, though there's not much room. She entered and looked around with barely concealed disdain, probably remembering all the times she'd made comments about my depressing little place. Now, of course, she was the one who might be homeless. I'm in trouble, she said without preamble. Real trouble. Everything is falling apart and I don't know what to do. What kind of trouble? I asked, settling into my single chair and leaving her to perch awkwardly on the edge of my bed. Financial trouble. All the payments you've been helping with. When you stopped, everything started defaulting at once. My credit score has dropped 200 points in 3 weeks. They repossessed my car. My health insurance is canceled. And my rent. She gestured helplessly. I can't make rent tomorrow without your help. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. That sounds really stressful. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Stressful, Junie, I could be evicted. I could lose my job if this gets worse. My entire life is collapsing. Have you thought about downsizing? I suggested. Maybe finding a place you can actually afford on your own salary. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. I can't just move to some cheap apartment. My image, my professional reputation. It all depends on maintaining a certain lifestyle. If my colleagues think I'm struggling financially, it could destroy my career. And there it was. The truth she'd probably never admitted even to herself. Her entire professional success was built on an image she couldn't actually afford. She wasn't successful. She was performing success using my money. Maybe that's the problem, I said gently. Maybe building a career on an image you can't sustain isn't as smart as it seemed. Her face flushed with anger. This is about dinner, isn't it? You're punishing me because I hurt your feelings. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to my desk, I've been doing some calculations I thought you might find interesting. I picked up the printed spreadsheet I'd prepared and handed it to her. This is every payment I've made on your behalf over the past 7 years. The total is $336,000. She stared at the paper, her face going pale. You kept track. I'm an accountant, I reminded her. I keep track of everything. Do you know what I could have done with $336,000? I could have bought a house. I could have started my own business. I could have traveled the world, gone to graduate school, built real savings for my future. But family helps family, she whispered. Yes, I agreed. Family helps family. But you called me a failure, Magnolia. In front of our entire family, you said I was comfortable being a failure. So I thought, if I'm such a failure, why would you want a failure's help? She looked up from the spreadsheet with tears in her eyes. I didn't mean it. I was drunk, and I was showing off, and I said something stupid, but this is destroying my life. No, I corrected her. This is revealing what your life actually is without my financial support. This is what failure really looks like. Not working multiple jobs to help your family, but being so dependent on someone else's sacrifice that you can't survive without it. The conversation continued for another hour, with her alternating between apologies, anger, bargaining, and desperate pleading. She offered to pay me back with interest to sign formal agreements to publicize my generosity to the family. She promised to never take me for granted again, to appreciate my sacrifices, to be the grateful sister she should have been all along. But it was too late. The damage wasn't just financial. It was psychological, emotional, fundamental. She'd shown me exactly how she really saw me, and I couldn't unsee it. When she finally left, still clutching the spreadsheet and promising to figure something out, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. For the first time in 7 years, every dollar in my bank account was mine to keep. 6 months later, my life was unrecognizable. And not in the way Magnolia had predicted when she called me a failure. Without the massive monthly drain of supporting my sister's lifestyle, I suddenly had financial freedom I'd forgotten was possible. The first thing I did was move out of my studio apartment into a beautiful one-bedroom place with a real kitchen and a balcony overlooking the park. Then I bought a reliable car. Not a luxury vehicle like Magnolia's repossessed BMW, but a dependable SUV that I could actually afford. Most importantly, I started my own freelance accounting business, something I'd been dreaming about for years but could never afford to risk. The irony wasn't lost on me. By calling me a failure and forcing me to stop supporting her, Magnolia had inadvertently given me the push I needed to actually succeed. Meanwhile, her own life had imploded spectacularly. The eviction from her expensive loft made local business news because her company was listed as a reference, leading to uncomfortable questions about her financial stability. She'd been forced to move back in with our parents, sharing her childhood bedroom while trying to rebuild her credit. Her job situation was even worse. The repossession, the eviction, and the general air of financial chaos had damaged her professional reputation exactly as she'd feared. When her company downsized 6 months later, she was among the first to be let go. Apparently, financial instability wasn't the image they wanted representing their brand. The family dynamics shifted dramatically as well. When the truth about my 7 years of financial support finally came out, partly through Magnolia's desperate attempts to get relatives to lend her money, everyone's perspective changed overnight. Mom called me crying, apologizing for all the years she'd dismissed my modest lifestyle while praising Magnolia's success. I had no idea, she kept repeating. I thought you just weren't ambitious. I never knew you were supporting her this whole time. Dad, who'd always been somewhat distant toward me, suddenly started calling regularly to ask about my business and offer advice. The man who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years was now telling people about his entrepreneurial daughter with obvious pride. But the most satisfying moment came at Thanksgiving dinner exactly 1 year after Magnolia's humiliating speech about my failure. This time, I was the one with success stories to share. My accounting business was thriving. I'd landed several major clients and was earning more than I ever had as an employee. I'd bought a house, a modest but beautiful place that was entirely mine. I'd even taken my first real vacation in years, a 2-week trip to Italy that I'd funded entirely from my own savings. Magnolia sat quietly at the other end of the table, picking at her food while I described my business growth and future plans. She was still living with our parents, still struggling to find steady employment, still dealing with the financial wreckage of her former lifestyle. Juniper's really turned her life around, Grandma Helen observed approvingly. It just goes to show some people are late bloomers. Success isn't always immediate. I caught Magnolia's eye across the table and saw something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. Not the desperate apologies she'd offered when her lifestyle was collapsing, but real understanding of what she'd lost through her cruelty and entitlement. After dinner, she approached me privately. Junie, I need to say something. I waited, curious to see if she'd learned anything from her experience. I was wrong, she said simply. Not just about calling you a failure, but about everything. About taking your help for granted. About building my life on your sacrifice. About never appreciating what you were doing for me. You were never the failure. I was. I know, I said gently. Can you ever forgive me? I considered the question seriously. I can forgive you, I said finally. But I can't trust you. And I'll never go back to the relationship we had before. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. I miss my sister. Your sister is right here, I said. But she's not the same person who used to pay your bills. She's someone who values herself enough to say no. Today, Magnolia and I have a cordial but distant relationship. She's slowly rebuilding her life, working a modest job and living within her actual means for the first time in her adult life. She's never asked me for money again, and I've never offered. Sometimes I wonder if my response was too harsh, if I should have given her another chance after she apologized. But then I remember that night at dinner, the laughter in her voice when she called me a failure, the years of taking my sacrifice for granted while building her image on my hard work. The truth is, canceling those payments wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my self-worth. For 7 years, I'd accepted the role of invisible supporter content to work in the shadows, while someone else received credit for the success I was funding. Magnolia's cruel words had finally shown me what that dynamic really was: exploitation dressed up as family loyalty. My business now specializes in helping people achieve financial independence, and I've worked with dozens of clients who've been trapped in similar situations, supporting family members who take their generosity for granted. sacrificing their own dreams to fund someone else's lifestyle, accepting emotional manipulation disguised as gratitude. The most important lesson I've learned is that real family doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Real love doesn't demand financial sacrifice as proof of loyalty. And real success isn't measured by how much you can give away, but by how well you can build a life that's genuinely yours. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been called a failure by someone you've been supporting? Have you ever realized that your generosity was being taken for granted by people who claimed to love you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because financial manipulation in families is more common than we like to admit, and sometimes the best thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop enabling the dysfunction. If this story of sisterly betrayal and ultimate financial justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt unappreciated for their sacrifices. Sometimes the people who call us failures are the ones who've been failing to appreciate our worth all along. Thank you for joining me on this journey from financial exploitation to true independence. Remember, when someone calls you a failure, sometimes the best response is to stop funding their definition of success. Until next time, keep building the life you actually deserve, not the one that makes others comfortable.